to you now for 15 minutes about the situation of the Romansh in Switzerland. So, if I tell you that Switzerland is traditionally a plurilingual and a multilingual state and a plurinational state, if I'm saying this in Serbia, I'm very conscious that this can be a bit special situation if you have 21 minorities and we have 4 communities. This is quite a difference. But nevertheless, we think that we are a plurinational and a multilingual state. You can't see very well the difference between red and yellow on this side, but on the right side in this part, this would be the Romansh minority. So since the foundation of the modern federal state in 1848, German, French and Italian were national languages of Switzerland, and since the votation in 1938, Romansh is also a national language. So this was the time when we had totalitarianism in Italy, totalitarianism in Germany, and this was the time when Switzerland developed the idea of unity in diversity, and it was the time where they accepted Romansh as national language, even if it was only 1% of the Swiss population speaking this language. And since 1996, Romansh is also a official language for the communication with people of Romansh language. So this is the constitution of today. We have the national languages, and then we have the official languages of the administration, which are mainly German, French and Italian, but as I said, Romansh in the contact or communicating with persons who speak Romansh. And also in this article, since 1999, we have the territoriality principle that is stated, because it says the cantons, because the responsibility for the languages and for teaching and so on for education is for the cantons, but the cantons shall respect the traditional territorial distribution of languages. So this is kind of a territorial principle in our constitution. If we are citing the Swiss scholar Matthias Grüner, we can say that the Swiss multilingualism is traditionally linked to language areas. So this tradition of the territory is very present in Switzerland. Within these areas, statistically, this language is always predominant. So we have in the west French as dominant language, then in the north we have German, in the south Italian, and the Romansh part. So there, statistically, this language is always predominant. And this means that in these language areas, only the national language of this area is like the official language. If you are in the French part, you will have school in French, and the official language will be French. So it's not in all Switzerland, all the 4 languages. We are, as a state, we are multilingual, but the communities are not as multilingual as the state. And what is also interesting is that these regions were, for a very long time, very homogeneous. So these frontiers between the language territories are very stable since centuries. Interesting is that the language frontiers can also be inside a canton. If we look to the canton of Bern, which is this canton, you see that the north is French and the main part of this canton is German. So in this canton, for example, in the constitution, the territorial principle is very clearly stated, because they say German and French are the Bernese cantonal and official languages, but the official languages are in the French in the Bernese Jura, German and French in the district of Ville-Bienne, German in the other districts. So it's clearly defined, only in this certain territory French is the official language. So I want you to see how deeply inscribed this territoriality principle is in Swiss reality. As I said, these borders are very stable for a long time, and up to the day of today, the only region that is not stable is the Romansh region. If you look to the right side, so this was the traditional territory, and today statistically we lost all these parts, so the bridge between the most eastern and the most western part of this territory. This is statistically we lost it, but the territory still is protected. So how, what was the history of the protection, of the territorial protection of the Romansh? So territorial protection was advocated by actors concerned about the preservation of regional and minority languages. And after the recognition of Romansh as a national language in 1938, then after the Second World War, it was different lawyers, politicians, and Romansh organizations that wanted a stronger territorial protection for the Romansh. And they struggled for implementation of this territoriality principle in the laws. As we have seen in the 90s, in the late 90s, this principle has been stated in the federal constitution, where it's also, they speak of linguistic communities. This was a new term that was inserted. And then also at the level of the canton of Graubünden, the territoriality principle was realized, where they said that the communes that have a big autonomy in Graubünden, and up to this day the communes could decide democratically, we want to change the language, but this right was limited since 2004, where the constitution of the canton says that they have to define the language in cooperation with the canton by respecting the traditional territorial distribution of languages. So this was the territorial principle, without saying it like this, was inscribed in the constitution. And then in 2008 we got a language act, and also here you can see how a statistical basis was taken for territorial definition. So communes where at least 40% speak a minority language like Romansh, they are declared as monolingual communes. So the school will be in Romansh mainly, and the political language should be Romansh also. If a commune has less than 40 but at least 20% of the population use a minority language, so Romansh, they are declared plurilingual communes, so bilingual, normally Romansh and German. So we don't speak about territoriality principle here, but it is a territoriality principle inscribed in this language act. But it is a statistic, so the problem is that the databases since 2000 is not renewed on a proper way, so this causes some problems. But in theory, if one commune wants to change the language, they have to make new statistics, and if, for example, the Romansh community is then less than 40, then it changes the community. As a result, we have a legally very well protected language territory. Up to here, it's all normal, let's say. But what I want to bring with this case to this discussion of non-territorial autonomy, it's what happens up to date. So in step by step, we have seen the protection of the territory was better and better. But what happened with the community in this time? In the 1940s, we have about 40,000 people speaking Romansh. 92% of them live in this territory. Then 1960, it's economic reasons. We have 80%, so already 12% they went mainly to the region of Chur, which is the capital and also the economic capital of the canton. Then in the 80s, we have 50,000 people speaking Romansh, only 60% living in the territory, and now 2018 we have only 35% of the Romansh people living in the territory. So 1/3 is in the capital of the canton in Chur, and 1/3 is in the rest of Switzerland, mainly in the German part of Switzerland. So the territoriality principle that we have achieved, that is a great protection that we have struggled for, today it loses its effectivity, because 2/3 of the population is not anymore living in the canton. The territorial principle doesn't only lose its function, it also inhibits now a promotion and protection of the Romansh in other parts. So we have two different situations. For the 1/3 that is in the region of Chur, you are still in the canton of Graubünden. So this is better, because in the canton of Graubünden, Romansh is also an official language. So you are not in the protected territory, but still the canton of Graubünden can support, for example, bilingual schooling, can support some measures for protecting the Romansh, because it's still in its cantonal territory, but it will never be the same than in the other regions. But what can you do, for example, in the regions of Basel and Zurich for all the third of the Romansh community that is living there? The confederation, that the canton cannot do anything because it's the territory of another canton. The confederation normally and theoretically can do nothing, because also in the Languages Act it's written, the confederation shall support measures by the cantons of Graubünden and Ticino to preserve and promote the Romansh and Italian languages. So the territoriality principle makes that to promote Romansh, the confederation can only give money to the canton of Graubünden, but the canton of Graubünden cannot do anything in the canton of Zurich. So what happens now? The new dispatch on culture, it's very new. It was on consultation this summer that the Swiss Federal Council published. It's like a national strategy on culture and language for the years 21 to 24. We have new things that appear here. This dispatch assesses the migration of the Romansh community to urban centers. It states that promotion should not be limited to the traditional territory, and we see that the Confederation plans measures to support Romansh outside the traditional territory. But at the same time, it states that the legal basis must be adapted in order to ensure a long-term embedment of these measures outside the national territory. The point is that in this dispatch on culture, they don't speak about nor the territoriality principle nor about non-territorial autonomy, because this will be quite explosive in the Swiss context. But what they say, in fact, is something like this. As a conclusion, we see a language community that is privileged for its status in a plurinational state, and that struggled for decennials for a territoriality principle, and it got its territorial protection. But nowadays, this community wishes the promotion and protection also outside of the territory, which may lead to the implementation of non-territorial principles of protection in Switzerland in the near future. Or at least, I think it will be a solution where the territoriality principle will be maintained, but where some elements of a non-territorial autonomy will be added to this protection. As it is the most endangered language of Switzerland, this could be possible. This would not be quite let's say, deciding on one or the other. I think it will be a compromise where you combine different principles. So what we see, the social trends and transformations of the modern society makes that a territorial approach that has for so long been a desire and also an effective protection to minority languages may become relative even for them in the 21st century, and make perhaps the principle of non-territorial autonomy the solution for minorities in the society of today that is a fluid society. Thank you.